Thank you for that introduction, Pastor David. I remember it well. It's almost as if it was yesterday. I was lying in a bath of water, about to give birth to my very first son. Well, actually, at the time, I didn't know it was going to be a son, but he was going to be the first nephew, the first grandchild. And I remember the midwife saying to me, "Oh, look down, he's there." So I picked him up out of the water, and I looked at his face, and I noticed that he opened just one eye, but the other eye didn't open. So I prodded around, as you do, and I pressed the socket, but there was no resistance. So I looked up at the midwife and said, "What's wrong with his eyes?" And she said, "It's okay, nothing's wrong, he's okay." But within a couple of days, we were escorted to Great Ormond Street. And Great Ormond Street is a children's hospital in London. And I remember that journey. I remember it again as if it were yesterday. The anxiety, the worry, the disappointment, I think. And getting to Great Ormond Street, our consultant looked at him and said, "Oh, let's find out what's going on here." And he told my husband and I that our son, who we then called Matthew, had a condition called Peter's anomaly. Peter's anomaly. Hands up if you've heard of Peter's anomaly. I wouldn't expect any hands to go up because it's 1 in 100,000 people that have this condition. And the way it presented in Matthew was similar to, if you think of a cataract. So he had scarring of the cornea. And in fact, the consultant said to us, there's 2 things that could happen. Matthew would be blind, which I suppose I could cope with after all. There are many people that we know that are blind that do very well. Or he could have something else. Something could happen to his teeth, or he could have learning disabilities. And it so happened that as Matthew got older, indeed, he did have learning disabilities. We can go to the next slide. And so began my journey. As Matthew got older, we appreciated that it was very difficult to communicate with him because Matthew didn't engage with the world as we all do. For me, I went through, some people talk about the 5 stages of grief. Well, actually, I didn't use the 5 stages of grief. I talk about the 5 stages to acceptance because for me, I call them the 5 A's, shall I say. And the first one was really a sense of anger. I really didn't know what had happened and why this happened. Was there something that I had done? And that led to anxiety. But eventually from anxiety to acknowledgement and awareness, and eventually to acceptance. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on in the workshop. But let's talk a little bit more about Matthew. If we go to the next slide. Matthew's diagnosis was such that, as I said, he was blind. And he also had something called autistic blindisms. So that simply meant that the way that he engaged with the world was very similar to those with autism. Matthew's nonverbal, so to be able to communicate with him, you can appreciate, was very frustrating. Frustrating for him and frustrating for us. So he was said to have severe learning difficulties. And Matthew would need 24-hour care. He would find it very difficult to engage with the world as we do, or to even be in the world alone. In fact, Matthew was different to everyone else. If we go to the next slide, because when I think about Matthew, I think about people like Matthew who engage with the world differently and have severe learning difficulties that probably communicate differently to everyone else. I thought, how do we engage with people like that? How do we extend love to people who have a different way of communicating with the world, who may not even have, as I said, any verbal communication? And I came across this quote by Baroness Mary Warnock. And she talks about a burden on society. She says, if you are demented, you are wasting people's lives, your family's lives, and you are wasting the resources of the National Health Service. In fact, the elderly and sick should die rather than become a burden. Now, this obviously shocked the world of people who have dementia, that community, but it also shocked me in a sense. And I thought, what does it mean to be human? Who makes the decision about whether somebody should live or die? What is it about human life What is it that gives us a sense of value? We go to the next slide. And I asked myself the question, or rather I made myself recognize that when we think about Western society, there are probably three things, at least that came to my mind, that, shall I say, give us a sense of value. One is that we can give back when we receive. The other is that we create worth for themselves, but also create wealth for others. Create wealth for themselves, but also for others. And I thought, well, when I think about Matthew, I'm not sure that Matthew will be able to do all of those three things. So I can understand possibly why Baroness Warnock would say, actually, people like Matthew, or people with dementia, or people who are not able to do these three things, actually, they're not worth anything. But actually, let's go to the next slide. And I thought about one of my favorite theologians who talks a lot about disability theology. And he describes value as being a gift, that we gift people value. Can we extend love? Can we extend people's value by giving them a sense of value? Is there something about being a human being versus a human doing? What value do we place on people with intellectual disabilities? Do we value people just because they are, or because of what they can do? Let's move on to the next slide. It always surprises me when I used to work for the South England Conference, when I would offer an opportunity to maybe spend some time with the congregation talking about making the gospel accessible, working and supporting people with disabilities. I'm often told, no, we don't need that here in our church because we don't have anybody in our church with a disability. Oh, okay, but I thought when you look at this opportunity that there are over 101 million people, i.e. 1 in 4 people, have disability, at least in the EU. The question then comes, if we have no one in our church with a disability, is this a missed opportunity? Let's go to the next slide. And the next one. And what I found is that one of the main reasons, or one of the barriers, shall we say, for engaging with people with disability are often those that are listed here. These are just but a few. You know, there's a fear. You're not really knowing how to engage with someone like Matthew, or they just don't have the knowledge. Some actually lack care. Some have limited resources, or basically they're just ignorant. I don't mean ignorance in that sense. I mean, they just don't know. Some may be related to their culture, and I think quite a few have a sort of an ableistic approach to ministry. And so I have what I refer to as the 3 pillars of engagement. If we go to the next slide, we'll see those 3 pillars. And these 3 pillars are, the first one I describe as understanding and recognizing diversity, because I'm often asked, oh, Sophia, would you be able to help us to create one big curriculum for people with special needs? Well, the challenge with that is everybody with disability is different. And so trying to create one curriculum will not actually suit anyone. There is something about understanding and appreciating that with that difference, therefore, comes time. And again, as John Swinton says, we value people by giving time. The second thing I think I always talk about is the importance of developing relationships. And I'm going to go to the last one, which is flexibility. When we think about people with disability, how creative are we in our church communities? I'm going to go back to the relationships one, but I just want to talk a little bit about the flexibility one and give you a little story that I thought was quite interesting. One church in the UK had a passion and a yearning for increasing their membership to include people with disability. And at the time, they had no one in their community that was deaf. But they decided that a few of them would go away and start to learn what's referred to as British Sign Language. This is a way of communicating with people with your hands. And about 4 or 5 of them went off and learned British Sign Language. And every Sabbath morning, they would sit at the front and just be signing. The congregation didn't need it, but they would just be signing. Then one Sabbath, a lady came into the church as she had just come to the country, And she was obviously looking for a church where she could feel that she belonged, that they recognized. And there was this church with this member, with these 4 members signing at the front. Of course, she rushed in and sat at the front and enjoyed the service because she could enjoy the service with the signing going on. And guess what happened within a couple of months? Not only did she come, but she brought her family, she brought her friends. Up to 9 people came along to that church that thought to be different, to be flexible, to be creative, who didn't have anybody at the time that used sign language, but they still sat at the front and they signed. That's being flexible. And let's talk about relationships. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say here. It's really important that you get to know people with special needs because, as I said before, they're all different. But let me talk a little bit about Matthew. How can you get to know Matthew? Well, and I like to talk about this because I think it's quite unusual. Now, if Matthew were here today and you went up to him and said, hi, the first thing he would do is he'd put his hand out to you. Don't forget he's blind. And you put his hand out and then you hold his hand. And then what he does is he takes your hand and brings it to his nose. Of course, he's smelling, trying to see, what does this person smell like, okay? And then the next thing he does is, this is really weird, but I mean, he does it every time. He just touches the wrist of the person, and then he'll touch their hair. And I can guarantee you he will know you the next time. But you wouldn't know that unless you got to know him, unless you built a relationship with him. And then I think about his brother, and I thought I'd have a little bit of a conversation with my mind with respect to them. And the slide on the screen, you'll see, this is referred to as circles of friendship, circles of friendship, let's call it that. Can you see? Lovely, circles of friends and acquaintances. And on the left-hand side, at least from what I can see, that's his brother on the left. They both have the same family, extended family. But when I look at the middle circle, you can see that his brother, I'm going to call his name is, I'm sure he wouldn't mind, his name is Christopher James, or he likes to be called CJ. So CJ has multiple friends, as you can see, in that friendship circle. But if you look at Matthew's, most of Matthew's are more about acquaintances, and these are people that are there to basically who are paid to be with him. But within that middle circle, there's hardly anybody. And I wonder whether this is not a missed opportunity for people, not only Matthew, but people like Matthew with severe learning difficulties, with profound learning difficulties, who maybe don't make friends as we do. And it's interesting, when we think about friendship, we do have a tendency to be drawn to people that look like us, or people that walk like us, or people that, have the same interests as us. And that's probably how CJ started his friendships. But someone like Matthew, it would be very difficult for him to make friends. It would mean that those around him who want to extend love to him would have to be intentional about making friends with him. And I feel this is actually an opportunity for us as leaders within our church community. We go to the next slide. So when we talk about creating environments where people feel loved or they feel that they belong, what does it look like? What does it mean to be a community marked by belonging? Because we talk a lot about people with disability being included in the life of the church. And I'd like to suggest that we move beyond inclusion to belonging and creating a sense of belonging. And the good thing about this is not only people with disability that feel and have a sense of belonging, but we all will have a sense of belonging. And what do these senses of belonging, what do these markers actually look like? And there is a theologian called Eric Carter, and he has done an extensive amount of research in this area of belonging. I just want to turn your attention to the left-hand side of the screen. It should be more central. And these are what he refers to as the 10 markers of belonging. That people are, first of all, present. People with disabilities are present. That they are invited. That they are welcomed. That they are known. That they're accepted, that they are supported, that they are cared for, that they are befriended. I feel this is so important, that they are befriended, and intentional befriending, that they are needed. Again, this is a really important thing, because we often say people with disabilities are in our church, they're included, but are they actually involved in the life of the church? Do we give them a sense that they are needed? And most of all, that they are loved. Let's go to the next slide. And I love this statement by John Swinton. When we talk about love, what do we mean by love? He says, Love is adopting an attitude wherein you look at other people, position them positively, value their existence, and show that you are genuinely glad that they are with you. And the next slide, he goes on to talk about a chap called John Piper. And this, I think, is quite interesting. He says, love is saying to the other person, it's good that you exist, and I'm glad that you are here. What do you think of that? And in fact, I'd like to extend it to you today. I'd like you to extend love to the person sitting next to you. Turn to them and say, it's good that you exist, and I'm glad that you are here. Try that now. Wonderful. Lovely. I suppose I'm up here not feeling loved, but never mind. As long as you've extended it to someone sitting next to you. Let's go to the next slide. So I'd like to encourage you today, looking at ensuring that we stay within our time frame now. And I just wanted to end with a couple of things. One, to encourage you to think about that, how you felt when you not only said that to somebody, but how you felt when you received it. This is something that we can extend very easily to people who are different to us, people who exist in the world differently to us. They're just different. And I wanted to leave you with this, what's called the Beatitudes of Learning Disabled. Oh, it's right in front of me. It says, blessed are you who take time to listen to difficult speech, for you help us to know that if you persevere, we can be understood. And blessed are you who walk with us in public places and ignore the stares of strangers, for in your companionship we find havens of relaxation. Let's go to the next slide. Blessed are you who never bid us to hurry up, and more blessed are you who do not snatch our tasks from our hands to do them for us, but often we need time instead of help. And blessed are you who ask for our help, for the greatest need is to be needed. And the next slide. Blessed are you when by all ways you assure us that the things that make us individuals are not our peculiar muscles, nor our wounded nervous systems, nor our difficulties in learning, but the God-given self which no infirmity can confine. And the final next slide, which says, rejoice and be exceeding glad and know that you give us reassurances that could never be spoken in words, for you deal with us as Christ dealt with his children. Would you like to find out what Matthew's doing now? Any interest in Matthew? Let's go to the next slide. That's my son, Matthew. And that's his smile. When he's in a good mood, that's Matthew. Even just looking at him makes me buzz. He's living independently now, or dependently, in the community. And the good thing about Matthew, he has, those of you who know me know that I love music. Matthew adores music. And in fact, it's through music that we've been able to engage with him and how he's been able to engage with the world. And he has perfect pitch. He loves and makes and appreciates music. He's a baptized member of the Oxford SDA Church in the UK. He attends church regularly. And he witnesses to those who support him. Every Sabbath, he brings his carers to his church community. And carers that attend the church with Matthew have shown an interest in faith. Others have renewed their faith. Matthew is lovable, and he's loved. Let's extend love to people like Matthew. Thank you.